So this is episode 73.
We've got quite a few things today, I think. So
Yeah.
what do you want to start off with?
Okay, I think I'm going to start off with an article in the mainstream media. It's actually kind of interesting. So the article was published in the Advertiser, which is a regional newspaper in Australia in a city called Adelaide. Adelaide is 1.5 million people, I think fourth or fifth largest city, something like that. And But it's quite regional. It's far down south in the continent, and if a lot of people, unless you're sort of from there, you probably haven't gone there. As it happens, I actually lived there for several years as a child. So it's gets cold. It's on the edge of the desert. I remember dust storms coming off the desert. So when I was a kid, but Australia has a lot of defence industry there, interestingly, and I think it's because that part of Australia doesn't have as much going for it as other parts, and I think the federal government kind of makes sure they at least get some defence employment and so forth. So there are a lot of defence industries. Another advantage, though, of course, to defence industry, getting off the topic a little bit, but another advantage to having the defence industry right there is Adelaide pretty much faces Antarctica, right? So if you wanted to protect your defense manufacturing from attack or something, it's a pretty good place to put it because it's a long way from anyone who might want to threaten it. So
Mhm.
anyway, that's Adelaide. Just I want to give people a little bit of a background on the city. So the newspaper is called The Advertiser, and I just noticed this article recently, and the article it's kind of interesting. So it raises a few men's issues, talks about a few different things, talks about health and so forth, which I'll get to, talks about education. I don't think we'll go into it today another time. We might be good for another time, but I have kind of differing issues on the concerns about men's education than quite a lot of other people do.
Mhm.
But anyway, it does talk about men's health, makes a point that men's health spending is obviously significantly trailing women's health spending. Um, but what's interesting about it is it also particularly explicitly notes in the newspaper article, right, that that feminists would probably be really upset at the publication of this article daring to talk about men's issues. But it does still buy into what I call the feminist historical narrative, the whole thing about men historically oppressed women and,
Right.
I don't know, only men had the vote or some nonsense. The reality
Mhm.
is, in most cases, men had the vote for a few decades,
Yeah.
before women got the vote in most countries. So, yeah, generally speaking, if a country was founded in the 19th century or earlier, there was usually a few decades difference, sometimes a few years. And if it was founded in the 20th or 21st centuries, there was usually no difference at all. So usually men and women will get the vote at the same time. Became independent, say, in the 20th century.
Right.
So anyway, there's quite a lot of nonsense in the feminist historical narrative. I've talked about it here. I've written quite a bit about it. But anyway, the author does buy into that, but nevertheless talks about men's issues. I kind of think that they're trailing, say, A Voice for Men by, 20 years kind of thing.
Hmm.
But they're getting there. So it's good to, I think it was a little bit unusual, as I said, in explicitly talking about feminists, perhaps getting upset about it. And this is why I'm citing this as a bit of perhaps a change of tone. We have seen men's issues discussed more in the mainstream media and in the public sphere, but this one I think was a little bit of a difference in tone where they were talking explicitly about feminists getting upset. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention it.
Mhm.
Don't really have much more to say about it. We can have an archive copy of or there is an archive copy online of the article because the main one is is behind a paywall. But I think we can probably put that underneath the video.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Be sure to send it to me, and I'll do just that.
Exactly,
Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah.
So,
It's one of those things. It's like if you're pandering to the the feminist historical narrative, then you're not much help here. It's like now it's men's turn to take on like some kind of feminist equivalent or something like that, and we've disavowed the notion that the men's movement is men's equivalent of feminism because our priorities and our methods and our end goals, our intents completely different. Um,
absolutely. Yeah,
right.
exactly.
So I think this calls for a way to shut down the feminist narrative because people, people who imagine themselves that are red pilled on this one or right of mind on this one, see some so-called anti-woke commentators crop up that still cling on to this. And so they're the ones we need to kind of, uh, clear their head here, and maybe see if we can get them to reject the narrative altogether, because there's a
Yeah.
lot of cases to be made
A
against it.
voice for men does differ from a lot of the people who call themselves red pilled. So, and the people behind a voice for men differ from others quite a bit. In a few areas, for example, a lot of people would claim that gynocentrism is based in biology and so forth, which is something we've discussed
Right.
many times before. And I think we make a pretty strong case at a voice for men and gynocentrism.com that that isn't the case.
Mhm.
Yeah, a lot of them may well buy into the feminist historical narrative. As I often say, that the feminist historical narrative is so pervasive, even many not anti-feminists buy into it. So they've
Mhm.
done such a good job of repeating it ad nauseum that people just accept it at face value. I've written a lot about that. You can look at a lot of my writings on A Voice for Men and elsewhere. And there's more coming on that as well, about how a lot of it is nonsense.
Mhm.
But yeah, so yeah, that's absolutely um, a big part of it. The fact that the feminist historical narrative is still out there. It's changing. It is
Mhm.
changing, but it takes time.
Right.
So I wanted to talk about it. Just yeah, that was very quick. Just a quick reference on this
Mhm.
particular article. It is a little bit unusual the tone that they've taken, and I'm happy to see it, even if the article is flawed. At least
I see.
it's
Mhm.
heading in the right direction. Um, so next one I wanted to talk about was is Billie Eilish. And now I must admit
Okay.
I don't keep up with with popular entertainment very much, and I didn't really know much about Billie Eilish at all until recently. In truth, I still don't really know that much about her at all.
Mhm.
But she's a singer. She recently won something at the Grammys, I believe, and she made a comment while she was there. No one is illegal on stolen land, which is an interesting comment to make. It's, of course, it's an anti-colonialist position. So
Mhm.
uh, after World War II, anti-colonialism, I want to make the definitions clear. After World War II, there was a movement towards anti-colonialism, and essentially the idea was the European powers had various colonies around the world, and the colonies would be gradually phased into independence. And this is something that was pretty much everybody agreed on for a variety of reasons. Partly because they felt it was many people felt it was simply the right thing to do. A lot of them also felt that the European powers, particularly the UK, for example, were exhausted after World War II. They didn't have the funds they had previously had. They couldn't maintain the empire. And of course, the British Empire, of course, had plans to unwind the British Empire, go right back to the late 1920s. So this was already happening before World War II. But yeah, so the anti-colonialism of the post-World War II period was about giving independence to various countries. I want to make it clear that that's different to the anti-colonialism movement of today, which is about essentially broadly about dismantling Western countries and attacking the legitimacy of Western countries. And I've personally, for example, seen this come out with Extinction Rebellion. I think I have mentioned it in a
Mhm.
previous episode. The Australian branch of Extinction Rebellion was making explicitly anti-colonialist statements on their Facebook page or various Facebook pages. One for the area of Australia I live in, and they actually upset quite a lot of other environmentalists doing that because the other environmentalists were saying, well, no, we should be talking about environmental issues, and you're off talking about questioning the legitimacy of the state or whatnot. So they actually got pushback from other environmentalists. And in the case, one particular case I saw, and unfortunately I didn't screenshot everything in those. I think it was about 10 years ago. In those days, as I do now, or I would have screenshotted it. They took the page down, made it private because yeah, they realised it was not an argument that a lot of people at the time were buying into. Unfortunately, it's become a bit stronger. But essentially, they're attacking the legitimacy of the state. And statements like this fall into the modern anti-colonialist movement. And I consider it to be one of the woke movements. So there are others, feminism, BLM, there's various other movements. They don't all agree on everything, but they come together when they have common cause, so forth, maybe for marches or whatever. But anyway, so yeah, but it's interesting. She's got some real pushback on this. I guess a lot of people have probably heard this because it's been in the mainstream media. But
Mhm.
so there's a local Indigenous group that I think has pointed out that Billie Eilish has not contacted them about handing her mansion over to them.
Mhm.
But I'll be getting onto someone else, a guy named Drew Pavlo, who's Australian, who's
Yeah.
related to this. But yeah, so she's got quite a lot of pushback on this and on this question about whether, well, if that's the case, then on what basis does she own, her own mansion and so forth in California? So, but a Australian man by the name of Drew Pavlo, who is from Brisbane, which is in my part of the world, and he originally sort of got public notice by arguing in favour of Hong Kong, essentially arguing against China asserting more control over Hong Kong and so forth. He himself, I don't think, has any
Mhm.
ancestry in Hong Kong, but he took a particular interest in this
Sure.
in this part of this particular issue. But since then, he's taken interest in a few different issues, which I suppose you could broadly say are anti-woke. I don't agree with everything he says, but I, agree with some things he says. But
Mhm.
he's actually traveling to the United States at the moment, okay, with the intention of living in Billie Eilish's mansion.
Mhm.
That's his stated
Okay.
intention,
Mhm.
because uh, because no one is illegal on stolen land. So his
Right.
argument is he ought to be able to just go
Mhm.
to the United States,
Mhm.
knock on the door, they'll open the door, and he'll I don't know, set up a tent or something
Yeah.
in her living room or something along those
Mhm.
lines. He
Sounds
has
good.
said, yes, exactly. He has said that he's not going to be doing anything illegal because obviously, if he attempted to enter the United States with his stated intention of doing anything illegal, he'd likely see himself turned back. So he's made it very clear he's not going to do anything illegal, but he is going to knock on the door and ask to be allowed to come into the mansion and live there.
Mhm.
So because no one is legal on stolen land, so
Right.
therefore he should have, using that statement as a basis, he ought to have a right to live in the mansion formerly owned by Billie Eilish.
Mhm. Right.
Yes. Anyway, so that'll be happening over the next few days.
Exactly. This seems like the pastime of rich American liberals. We've already made some distinctions about the term liberal, but that's why I'm saying American
Yes,
liberals here.
quite right.
But
Exactly.
yeah, yeah, but yeah, it is their favorite pastime to kind of make statements about the what they deem the downtrodden. In case this would be
Mm.
the indigenous peoples of the Americas and the people and that's we the white people stole land from or so forth.
Yes.
But of course uh, they're the ones kind of living it up in their the richness of their personal resources and so
Mm.
forth. It's funny. Every time uh, I hear some kind of uh, loud anti-personal property, anti the rich, and anti-business stuff. It always comes from rich American liberals. So, because much more than you'd think otherwise. Uh,
It
because
it absolutely does. Go on.
yeah, it's a big busybody sort of mi mindset to kind of control one thing or the other, which is not in the spirit of entrepreneurship one bit. It's not in the spirit of
Quite right.
free enterprise. It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Many people may work hard and earn their way up to what we call the top,
Mm.
only to kind of be entrenched in this sort of mindset.
Mm.
Um,
And they're probably freed of a lot of other concerns. They're freed of the need to work, even if they do work, and they often perhaps find themselves. So they probably have a lot of spare time, and they find themselves so often caught up in these sorts of ideas.
mhm,
It's not just the United States. It's true in other Western countries. True
mhm,
too. It's primarily inner city. Yeah, people have, and I want to clarify the use of the term education here, but people who have many years of formal education probably work in white collar jobs, and they do tend to lean quite far left, and it's quite
mhm,
interesting. Um, so, in fact, a term has been coined for them: affluent white. Well, this is for the women at least.
yeah,
Affluent white female urban liberals. And that was originally, the term was originally coined by Greg Gutfield. He didn't include urban, but that was added later, which I think
Yeah.
fills out the acronym. So affluent,
Yeah.
white, female, urban, liberal. So I think it covers them quite well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yes.
and I kind of want to also take exception to the whole stolen land thing. It's always stolen land when it's white. So
Mm, mm,
when it's the whites that are doing it now, and this double standard. Every time a like white people comes in, they have taken land from them. But if say something more Anglo-Saxon, something more European, and so forth. They don't even get to own their own land because, everybody is supposed to be welcome over there, mass
mm,
migration,
mm.
whatever. And
Quite the double
so,
standard, isn't it?
exactly.
Mm.
Like,
Sorry, go
you
on.
know, right. No, it's not, anti-white is not conspiracy theory. It's something that
Mm,
is in play, and we're trained, or most people are trained to not view it as a problem. They've got this reflexive reaction to uh, deny it exists, but wholeheartedly support it at the same time.
mm. That is true. I will also state that it's also closely tied to anti-West, and there have, for example, been some interesting cases. As a Australian woman, I can't recall her name right now, but she's taken quite a strong anti-woke position. She is of Indian descent, but she's lived in Australia and speaks with a broad Australian. I gather she was born here. She speaks with a broad Australian accent and so forth. But she's certainly getting it as well, so even though she's of Indian descent, because she's sort of taken that position, that Western position, she's getting hit with it as well. So I suspect we may see more of that actually. That it may shift as a greater proportion of culturally Western people are actually from, say, non-Anglo-Saxon countries
Mhm.
or non-European countries. We may yet see that broaden in the sense that that we focus less on white and maybe more on Western culture. That's my sort of
Mhm.
suggestion as to where it might be going.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's like a uh, attempt to redefine Western culture or just destroy it, because we're supplanting all these
Mm.
these these non decidedly non-Western sort of elements into Western society, and
Yeah, it may well be the case of both are there because one of the things about the movements that generally fall under the woke banner is they aren't very well planned. They actually aren't very well planned, and they don't really have long-term plans.
Mhm,
And so it may well be that they're both trying to redefine the West and trying to destroy it. Perhaps different groups are doing that. Perhaps some same groups are trying to do both, and so forth.
mhm,
We see this
mhm,
with feminism, for example, where intersectional feminism was very closely tied to, for example, trans rights movements, right? And that has backfired spectacularly on women,
right.
where women's sports are now being, where trans women, for example, are in women's sports and so forth,
Mhm,
and they've called the trans movement a men's rights movement, and so forth, completely
mhm,
denying the fact that intersectional feminism was right there at the beginning.
mhm,
And I've stated my position. I oppose transitioning of children, and for adults, I don't care whether they transition or not. I think that's a choice for
mhm,
themselves. I think in at least some cases it's a mistake, but that's as
mhm.
long as they're of sound mind, it's
Yeah,
their mistake to make. I encourage people to
exactly.
educate themselves. Yeah,
Mhm,
but to be
right,
clear, I'm no means anti-trans in the sense of adults. I am anti-trans in the sense of children. So anyway,
Exactly right.
but
Yeah,
but yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but having said that, yeah, intersectional feminism was very much close. I mean, that's intersectionality. That's a very fundamental
Mhm,
nature of
right,
intersectionality, right?
right.
Uh, and uh, and so it was right there at the beginning, and they've completely disavowed it now, and that's where the feminist civil war came from. But
Mhm,
it's interesting that I think if you really look at these movements, they're not very good at long-term planning at all. They're quite organic. That's my view.
mhm,
I reject any claim that there's sort of people pulling the strings behind the scenes and planning it all out. I don't think that works as true at all. I think if that was true, they'd probably be working a lot better than they are actually.
mhm,
I think it's more that they're quite organic. They're
mhm,
probably quite simple ideas. They're easy to embrace and so forth, and you get in with the crowd and you get that support of the crowd and you stick to these simple ideas. But I think
mhm,
that if you actually look at the long term results, they've been nothing but terrible, including for the people who were advocating these ideas. And again, I cite the position of what's going on with women's sports, for example, as an example of that. Not the only one by any means.
right. Well,
Mm.
I need to ask you something. What is your philosophical definition of the West?
Oh, Great. I'm so glad you asked me. Okay, so
This was
I
not premeditated, by the way, guys.
no no
This is not one of those hidden things. This is an honest question for me to ask him.
that's right. Oh, he's pounced on me. No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
Yeah, right.
So I've actually thought about this quite a bit, and I realized. So I had a definition for a long time, and I actually realized eventually my definition had a flaw in it. So I fixed the
Okay.
flaw. Okay.
Okay.
So all right. So the simple definition I use for the West is a Western country is a country in Western Europe or where a majority of the population are descended from people from Western Europe. So that's the simple definition I used for a long
Mhm.
time. However, I realized later that that meant Latin America was
Mhm.
Western, and I draw a distinction there. And I haven't got a great sort of line to draw. Other essentially say except for Latin America, which is a
Mhm.
separate society. So I contend that and you could say, well, what's Western Europe versus Eastern Europe? That's probably
Mhm.
fairly well defined. There's kind of an axis going down the middle of Germany and
Mhm.
Italy. And wait, somebody might have used that term before, actually, axis.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it runs down roughly down the middle of Europe between
Mhm.
Germany and Italy. That's Central Europe. Countries like Czechoslovakia and Austria, Central Europe.
Mhm.
But Germany and Italy would both count as Western. Probably Austria would count maybe as Western, and that's about it.
Mhm.
Everything else is pretty much Eastern Europe.
Gotcha.
Because Austria is culturally so similar to Germany, I'd give them a pass and include them in Western Europe. But everything else in Europe is Eastern Europe. So that's Western Europe, or where a
Mhm.
majority of the population descend from people from Western Europe. But as I said, I have to do a carve out for Latin America,
Mhm.
which leads to the odd situation that Spain and Portugal are in Western Europe, but their colonies aren't.
Mhm.
Uh, but this is, I think, and okay, and if I could offer a reason for that, I would say that the settlement of South America was very different to the settlement of North America or
Mhm.
Australia or New Zealand, which are all Western countries. So Canada,
Mhm.
the United States, Australia, New Zealand, or Western countries, obviously. The settlement in South America was very different in that there was a lot more mixing with the indigenous population, whereas in North America and Australia, people generally didn't have kids with the indigenous population. It did happen a bit, but mostly it
Mhm.
didn't. The populations kept themselves separate and still do to a large
Mhm.
degree. In South America, there was a lot more mixing with the indigenous population. Most South Americans, I think, or at least a large proportion, have some sort of
Mhm.
indigenous ancestry. And so I think that it's probably still the case that more than half the population descend from Western Europe, but I suspect that because of far greater mixing with the indigenous population, and therefore probably importation of the indigenous culture, you
Mhm.
ended up with Latin America being this distinct
Mhm.
subset, perhaps you could even say, of a Western culture. Yeah,
Right. Okay.
and you
So.
you do see it, or a separate culture anyway. Yeah.
Mhm. Right, right, right. So this is more of a regional matter instead of a philosophical matter.
Well, it carries with, so I define it regionally. However, the culture got carried with the people. So
Hmm.
the countries of Western Europe and the countries of North America and Australia and New Zealand, all, if you look at them on the map today, they're pretty much the countries that have generally been doing, apart from, and interestingly enough, Japan and South Korea, and to a lesser extent Taiwan, are kind of an exception there. But other
Hmm.
than those countries, the Western countries have been the most prosperous and the most successful, right?
Yes.
And they're
Hmm.
not without their problems. I mean, Spain and Portugal were both dictatorships. Yeah, I think Spain into the 1970s and
Okay.
Portugal into the 1980s. So these
Yeah,
are
right.
supposed, Western European countries that were not democratic until, I was alive when these countries were dictatorships, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So there are certainly Western countries that are new to democracy, but nevertheless, they do tend to have a strong emphasis on the rule of law and various other characteristics, aspects of Western culture.
Hmm.
That even though there are other differences, there's big differences between, say, French culture and British culture, and yet
Hmm.
they have that commonality in
Hmm.
terms of the rule of law, separation of church and state. Well, to a certain extent,
Yeah.
separation of powers. Anyway, that's a better one to say. Separation of powers, because the separation of church and state is something that all Western countries do embrace, but they do it to varying degrees.
Right. Hmm.
But
Yeah.
certainly separation of powers. So anyway,
Gotcha.
Latin America, in
Hmm.
comparison, was culturally very different and has been very unstable politically
Hmm.
compared to, say, the Western countries.
Right. Exactly. Now, if I were to be more philosophical about the definition of the West here, And I think I've been in a more critical position of the whole West and East the dichotomy, but I think I could speak positively for the West in this case. Uh, what the West is really dis that distinguishes itself from the East is that it recognizes the idea of uh, the I, individual as like an
Mm.
actual
Hmm.
factor in matters, and whatever a given outlook on that at the time, it kind of either deals for it or against it. Now the thing with the East is that it's sort of in denial that this thing is really a thing, which I
Mm.
think the East are in error about this because I think individualism as such is not something that is limited to West or East.
Mm.
That this is actually something that is a human
Oh, of course,
matter, right?
100%.
Right. But the West recognizes it as a real thing
Mm.
and deals with it one way or the other, has kind of colored its own culture as such regarding that. And the East are sort of have sort of been in denial of this, kind of dismissing it as an illusion or as opposed to something that you could deal with in a punctuated way, whether in support or against it. So I think that that's like the most important distinction about what makes West and East, and what makes the West great in my mind is
Mm.
pro-individualism. Those could
Yes.
because that's the thing that makes prosperity. It's not subjugation of the individual to the collective that makes things great. That's how you destroy things, and that's how you destroy individuals.
It would actually be interesting to. I've probably never looked at history with a view to looking back to find where and when that really got going. It would be quite interesting to do,
Hmm.
actually. Um, it's not directly related to what you're talking about, but it's interesting. When I looked at the history of England, right, which
Hmm.
I did. I'm a bit of a history geek, but and it wasn't the first thing I looked at. There are other things that I thought looked at first, but at some point in my 30s or whatever, I really started digging into the history of England,
Hmm.
and what I found led me to believe that the British Empire was probably pretty much inevitable. The it says it's not directly related to it, but it may go along with it because there, going as far back as the 8th century, there were things that were different about England, right? And
Hmm.
they built a strong public service, and Alfred the Great uh, he would actually find, and this actually speaks to individualism.
Hmm.
He would have his agents that are going around the country, his representatives and so forth. If they identified a particularly intelligent young boy,
Hmm.
then the boy would be invited. His parents would be invited for the boy to be placed in a special school,
Hmm.
and given an education at the expense of the king. And these boys were then trained up, and they had a great deal of loyalty to the king then, because the king
Hmm.
had spent all this money on their education, and they had the best education money could buy at the time.
Hmm.
And they would then be, when they grew up, they graduated, which was probably about 14 or 15 at the time. They would actually be put into the public service, the civil service. And so
Hmm.
he ended up building this really strong tradition of a civil service in the UK. Oh, sorry, in
Hmm.
England actually.
Hmm.
And actually in Wessex, which was the kingdom that he had, that ended up being the basis for the Kingdom of England. And so that went on. This idea of this strong sort of governmental structure, as I think I mentioned in a previous episode, when William the Conqueror conquered England, he left the English administration in place because it was better than anything that he had at home. And this went on and on. There were a few other things that England did well. They introduced jury trials and so forth, where the idea of people being tried by a jury of their peers, a jury of their peers, and of course that again speaks a little bit to individualism and the rule of law, in England, because of the way that the state had been created, there were constraints on the king, even not
Hmm.
originally, not many constraints,
Right.
but unlike say France, where the king's power was absolute, that was not the English. That was never the case for the English king, going
Hmm.
right back sort of to the 8th century, and so. Having looked at all this, I ended up concluding the British Empire was, and there were various other things that England had going for it. Being an island nation, so it was easy to
Yeah.
defend. Very, very good farmland and so forth. And then concluding the British Empire at some point was probably pretty much inevitable. But anyway, there's other things like the power of the United States, arguably, was pretty much inevitable as a result of the. Thomas Sowell talks a lot about this, about the river system in the US and the large amount of arable land and the accessibility of the land and the good
Mhm.
harbors and all sorts of things.
Right.
So again, the United States becoming a superpower was probably pretty much inevitable as well.
Right.
So, but although it's not specifically about individualism, I do think it touches on some parts of it.
Well,
So I do think
yeah.
that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right because it kind of recognizes the greatness in certain individuals, like the boy you're kind of talking
Exactly, like
about.
the boys going
Yeah,
to
yeah.
school. Exactly,
Hmm.
that's right. And that was pretty much China had a very strong civil service as well, right?
Hmm.
Um, and that put the Chinese state in a really good stead for a long time as well. But at least insofar as Western Europe goes, this was and most of the rest of the world, this was pretty much unique. This
Hmm.
idea that a peasant boy would be taken away from the
Right.
farm and out of the muck,
Yeah.
and
Right.
we'd be put into school and talk Greek and Latin. It's
Right,
extraordinary.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So this is funny. Because you mentioned you kind of wanted to hold off the whole thing about boys in education and something like that, but I
Mm,
think I got something tangential to that.
yeah.
Because we always talk about, the underfunding of boys and the overfunding of girls and so forth, right?
Mm,
So I guess what I'm more concerned about right now is that a combination of two things. One is that, since the education system is flawed anyway, we should probably forget about the funding thing and just do our best for our boys and educate them ourselves and let them find their own manner of education and go forth. But the second part of it is that if there's any kind of funding, whatever, that's necessary, it should probably more towards the gifted who can't afford to do so. And
mm,
those would probably, by and large, be a lot of boys that could
they
really kind
were.
of get, yeah, yeah, exactly.
As a result of male variability, we know
Mhm.
once you get to an IQ of 140, it's about 90% male. Exactly. And
Wow.
after that, yeah, that's right. It's really very rare
Yes.
for a
Hmm.
girl to have an IQ, much higher than that. Very, very high.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Right.
right.
Mhm. Right.
Yeah. It falls off exponentially, I think, after that. So,
Hmm.
um, yeah, so I guess we probably could talk about education, but I've kind of kicked this down the road a little bit, partly because I wanted to get all my ducks in a row before I started talking a lot about this. But I think the time has arrived. I think okay,
Hmm.
so in within men's rights, and I have talked a little bit about, I've touched on it, but within men's rights and the broader manosphere and so forth, people do talk about boys' education. You'll often hear, for example, people say things like that boys are now around about a third of university students and so forth,
Hmm.
and they're actually clustered, by the way, in not surprisingly in STEM fields and so forth. So outside STEM fields, many often
Hmm.
very very small numbers of boys, or men, I should say, too. There obviously are problems at university. The Title IX, that's been the Title IX cases that have been brought against men and so forth, and the kangaroo courts that have been used against men, absolutely 100% problems and need to be addressed,
Hmm.
which has already started. In fact, so some of similar suits have gone against women now, and that is being addressed. It is being recognised to some extent, but a lot of people talk about the lack of men in university and they raise this as a problem. I actually don't think it's that much of a problem. Now, obviously, men who want to go to university should be able to, and they shouldn't be disadvantaged. They shouldn't be subject to these sort of kangaroo courts that they have. So there are
Yes.
issues there, right? But my contention is that, okay, before I go on with that, I'm going to say something about universities. I went to university. I have a degree, I have
Hmm.
a Bachelor of Science degree. I graduated in the 90s, and it was very university then was very different to university now. And my position for both men and women and boys and girls, this is a position I've been saying in my private life for about 20 years, and I'll be very clear on this. Don't go to university don't go to
Hmm.
university because it's what you're supposed to do, or what your
Yeah.
parents want you to do, or it's what your friends are doing, or it's what everybody else
Yes.
does, right?
Right.
And in the United States, that results in people racking up very large debts. We have a partially Here in Australia, we have a partially government funded system, but nevertheless, students here still get quite substantial debt.
Yeah.
My view is work out what you want to do in life. What is your plan? Does your plan involve going to university? Is it a requirement to go to university to achieve your goals?
Yeah.
If it is, go. If it isn't, don't go. That's the view I take, right?
Right.
And somehow some people have managed to misunderstand me saying this in my private life and think that I'm anti-university. I'm absolutely not anti-university, okay? And in certain
Mhm.
areas like law and medicine, university will continue because of the need for specialized equipment and various other things, and engineering and physics. There will be areas which, because of that need for equipment and so forth, university will continue to be central to those sort of professions. But
Mhm.
nevertheless, again, work out what's your plan. Does it involve going to university? If it does, go. If it doesn't go, if it doesn't, then don't go. This may seem obvious, but that's not how most people are doing things. No. So my contention, having said that, want to establish that's my view on universities. It has been for a very long time.
Mhm.
My contention is that men are being more nimble about their futures and their education than women are,
Yeah.
and I believe this is the reason why there are so many men missing from universities. Men are essentially, a lot of them, I think, are doing essentially what I'm taking the same position as that I've expressed, and they've said they've looked at it and they've gone, I could go to university, I'd rack up a huge debt, but it isn't really necessary. I want a degree, I want a career in IT, for example. I can learn to code. There are great resources online and so forth, and I am going to, pursue it that way. And maybe I'll go to university even later or something. Maybe get a diploma later, but my focus will be on self learning and getting if you want to be a developer, there are many roles in IT. If you want to be a developer, maybe getting a portfolio out and so forth. And I think a lot of men have chosen that route, and I think a lot of women are doing what their parents, particularly their mothers and their grandmothers, did,
Mhm.
which was go to university. And they get a degree, which maybe in marketing or something like that, and they come out with a massive debt. And honestly, I remember I've been saying this for at least 20 years, but the YouTubers now, and probably Instagram and all the rest of it, are full of young women lamenting that they would be in the same position they are now if they had not gone to university. And so I think my contention is, as I said, that I think that men on average are being more nimble about it.
Mhm.
And this is certainly consistent with what we know about broadly about gender differences, where men tend to be more individualistic, women tend to be more consensus driven.
Yes.
Uh, and yeah, so that's not even contentious. In fact, feminists argue that that's an advantage for women. I would tend to say, on average, it's probably not,
It's
but
not.
but
I can
feminist,
tell
yeah,
you
but
straight up, it's not.
exactly, that's why I would agree with you. But feminists can't deny this because they have
Mhm.
used it as a basis for arguing that it's an advantage
Mhm.
for women. So
Yeah. Right.
that's not right. So that's why I think it's happening. That's where I think a lot of the missing men are.
Mhm.
And I think that trend will continue. And unless university sort of picks up its socks, as it were, and starts offering something better, I think you'll continue to see men more and more abandoning university. I
Mhm.
think that my view is that it kind of was a bit of a perfect storm that the universities started softening their degrees right about the time the internet appeared and information was democratized to a large degree, and you could learn a lot of this stuff on your own in your own time. And if you want to learn, for example, Python, for example, getting back to
Mhm.
the IT side,
Yeah.
then there's a world of great resources out there and online tutorials and all the rest of it that will teach you how to do this, right? And a world of example code to look at and so forth. So there's still things that formalization that people would benefit from, but
Mhm.
the universities aren't in a lot of cases aren't offering enough. I think at this point to make it
Right.
worth it for a lot of men. So anyway,
Exactly. Yeah.
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 So
Especially
that's
if it's
yeah.
yeah. Especially if it's like some kind of a liberal arts thing where they're trying to kind of jam pack a lot of stuff, including some useless things,
Yes.
and kind of what I think is in effect wasting their time instead of making them more well-rounded. I think
Yes.
well-roundedness comes from more voluntary w ways of kind of going about it. And not to drag this
Absolutely.
too much longer here, but um. Uh, this is regard to, the whole jumping into university or college just 'cause thing that you were talking about. For men, it's like for boys anyway, young man, let's just say. Um, I don't know that most really know what they want to do by the time that they're supposed to enter that, when they graduate high school. I don't know who has a fantastic idea of what they want to do. And, if they're a young man in today's day and age, there'd be more jadedness, I think.
Right.
Or if they're right of mind, they're probably suffering more because of it, because of the world they have to deal with. And so they might be jaded going into things if they do go into this. And well, that's kind of how I felt. I knew I was going to do something with technology, and I didn't really know anything about programming, but I kind of went with computer science as my degree because that felt like it was generally where it was going to go. And I kind of slogged through it. I was really unhappy at the world and the state of affairs of
Mm,
things, and I was kind of like in a don't give a shit kind of a mood, right? But
mm.
but I went in, and it's probably affected my schoolwork somewhat negatively at the time, I think. Um, but um, if I had some time to really get to know the field and know really what I might have wanted to do in my life. I think I would have gone into a sort of a double major of
Mm.
programming and music.
Ah, right.
And maybe do some technology for music and stuff like
Mm.
that. And I don't think I would have made Suno. I think that's more of a different mindset. But it feels like something I should have been able to allow myself some time to think about. And by the time I figured out that would have been a nice deal, it was too late. I was a senior by then, so
And
I would not have been able to minor in it, in music,
Uh,
rather.
that is a really good point that we do expect people to make these decisions quite young, at least
Hmm.
in terms of if those are people who are looking to go to university. That's right. You expect to have some sort of plan and go. And it's very common for people to change careers now, and not unusual for people to change their degrees as well,
Hmm.
actually.
Yeah.
So, and then that which drags out the entire process. I know when I went through, I did a sort of Bachelor of Science degree. At the time, 70% of people who started the degree didn't finish the degree.
Mm.
And a fair number of those were because they had moved into other degrees, I think. But yeah. So this is quite, and it is a related problem too. We expect people to go to university and they rack up these massive debts before they're really kind of sure what they wanted to do.
Hmm.
So there's probably something to be said. I mean, they talk about it's very common in the Commonwealth countries for someone to have a gap year. So I don't know if that term's used in the US so much, but
Might have heard
essentially
of it.
after yeah, so when I went to university, for example, it was already so entrenched in Australian culture that you could automatically defer your degree for a year. So when you received the acceptance from the university, it was a paper form in those days. You could tick a box saying defer me for a year and send it back, and that would it. They would just bump you a year into the next year's intake. So it was
Mm.
that common already, and that was in the 90s. So um, and that certainly helps. But perhaps if people go out into the world more and learn a little bit more about the world before they even consider this sort of thing, there might be something to be said for that as well. And we
Mhm.
might see less people getting these useless degrees if they go out and they
Exactly.
work for a couple of years, yeah,
Mm.
and they learn a little bit about themselves and about the world
Mhm.
before, and that would benefit both men and women and society as
Right.
a whole. Mm,
Exactly. One last thing
yeah.
about university on my end is that, it's, and I think it's really dangerous at this point. It needs an overhaul because,
Mm.
aside from it being like a big training ground for leftist types nowadays, and we can't really deny that anymore, no matter,
No, no,
right?
absolutely not.
And it's a place where people like Charlie Kirk go to die. That's my closing statement on
Literally,
universities.
that's
Yes,
right.
right.
Um, on education, that's a really good point. That's right. We had in that discussion we were just having, we hadn't previously talked about the ideology at all, but that's there, as you say, that's there as well. So
Yes.
yes. I did want to, on the topic of education, since we're talking about
Yeah.
it, I'll continue a little bit. So that's the university side of things. Then you've got the school side of things. Now, boys are lagging in school, but I'm sure some people in our audience know a bit about this, but I'm going to say it anyway because I'm sure there are lots who still don't know. Boys are lagging in school in the grades. Okay. But it's been known now for at least 15 years, right, that there is a general trend of female teachers marking boys down. And this has been found in, I think, something like 60 countries. The OECD has studied it across the world. Uh, this is and what they often, what they've often said when they're investigating this is they've assessed it and they found that the female teachers are marking down misbehaving students, and the misbehaving students are more likely to be boys. And that may well be true. I don't think that entirely explains it, but that's an explanation that is often given.
Hmm.
But nevertheless, we do know, directly or indirectly, boys are being marked down because when computer marking is done, for example, the boys do much better. And in actual fact, in a lot of cases, the difference actually disappears. That's not always the case, but in a lot of cases, the difference actually disappears, and the boys aren't doing worse at all. They're essentially just being marked down by female teachers. And since
Hmm.
particularly in primary school, but also in
Right.
high school, the teachers are primarily women. This is impacting them quite significantly. So this is a real problem. Not much is being done about it. It is widely recognised, but as I said, not much is being done about it. I guess computer marking or independent marking would be the way to do it, where
Hmm.
you could, for example, someone could write their student number or something on their paper and have the paper graded by somebody who's not their teacher. But
Hmm.
even that's not perfect because if they've written it, male and female writing can generally be distinguished.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Right,
so
right.
that alone doesn't solve it, but maybe some sort of computer marking could solve it. But I think there's one exception to that, and that's reading, where the boys do seem to be lagging. I'm again not especially concerned about that. So, and that's because we do know that it takes males longer to fully mature, right? So they're not arguably fully mature physically until about 25 or something like that. Whereas for girls, they've pretty much, for example, reached their full height at 16.
Hmm.
And they're pretty much near physical maturation at about 16. So I'm not terribly concerned with that because I think there's plenty of evidence that out in the workforce, men are reading and writing just fine. There's
Hmm.
probably more generally a problem with the quality of reading and writing, I suspect, but I
Yeah.
don't think it's necessarily specifically gendered there. Uh, but as I said, there is sort of it does take that little bit longer for them to sort of probably reach their peak. Interestingly enough, there's a saying um, in the publishing industry: men don't read. Right? But the recent evidence suggests that men are in fact reading, but they're just not reading. I think we talked about this last time. No, they're just not reading what the publishing industry is putting out. So they're
Yeah.
reading older books. They're reading non-fiction books. So they're not reading novels, modern novels. They are reading novels, but tend to be older novels. And
Hmm.
and I could say, at the risk of at a personal anecdote, that's certainly true for me. I don't know. I can't think of any book that I've purchased from a bookshop, a novel, in at least the last 25 years. And
That's new,
even
right? Yeah.
that's new. That's new.
Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
That's right.
Right.
And even I think the last one was the Mars series by Kim Stanley Robinson.
Okay.
And yeah, and that would be certainly 20 years ago that was published. And I purchased those on a recommendation, and I like them. Although there's a bit of an anti-male bias within uh, in the books themselves, but
Yeah, of
over
course.
yeah, yeah. But there's a lot of good things about that. There are a lot of other good things about those books.
Hmm.
But I think
Yeah.
that I think those are the last time I've purchased a new novel. Whereas I would read Asimov, or I might read
Hmm.
Heinemann or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think that's pretty common.
I still got an Isaac Asimov collection that I still need to read. And I think it's finding the time to read is also a thing. It's something I struggle with mostly. But recently I've been kind of managing to read something per day. For some
Good.
amount of time. Yeah. And one of my
Yeah.
favorite ways to read nowadays is, the weather's kind of nice now, right? And
Mm.
so, so I've taken up pipe tobacco, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, right, right. Yeah. So
Okay.
it's kind of it's become like a wonderful hobby for me, a wonderful interest for me. I try to manage one a week at least. But so I could just go out before sundown, right? And to just light up a pipe and read either uh, my collection of Aristotle or my Thomas Aquinas collected
Ah,
works or an Ayn Rand collection or even some comics, like maybe I have like
yeah.
some Sonic the Hedgehog comic I want to read or something like that. But this
Mhm.
this this I could it's still reading. I don't care what you say, it's still reading.
It is.
Um,
I haven't been
but yeah,
doing much
that's
lately, so I think you've inspired me. Anyway, go on.
yeah, yeah, but it's like it's a good time to kind of sit down and just kind of relax and just look into some pages and think about things. And there's some uh, uh, there's a lot of inspirations that could happen with the relaxation of a pipe and just kind of thinking about what you're
Yeah.
reading. Yeah,
Yes.
I more prioritize thinking about what you read than just read and consume.
Yes, yes,
By the way,
yes,
so.
absolutely. So it sounds like you're reading both fiction and non-fiction material there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I read a lot of non-fiction, but I haven't been reading any fiction the last couple of years, and kind of inspired me. I'm just trying to think if I've read any novels in the last couple of years, but I think you've inspired me there. I might have to start doing a little bit each night or something like that, because there are a few
Yeah.
books I want to read.
Yeah.
There's a book. One of my favorite books of all time is The Assyrian, which is a historical novel about a prince in ancient Assyria, and there was a follow up called The Blood Star, and I couldn't get it at the time when I
Mhm.
read the book in the 90s. And I've since got a Kindle version, so it's sitting there. Actually bought that about a year ago, so I should go and read The Blood Star. So
Mhm.
it's actually very, very, very well researched historical novel, both of them.
Mhm.
Apparently, The Blood Star, whereas the first one, The Assyrian, is within the Assyrian kingdom. Apparently, the second one's a bit of a travelogue of the ancient world.
Yeah.
So this
Right.
character, he's been well, bit of a spoiler. He's been
Yeah.
exiled from his kingdom,
Yeah.
and he's now going to travel the world, and he'll go to Greece and various other places. So
Right.
yeah,
Well,
so
fiction is not, it can have the same philosophical value as the nonfiction at times because a lot of the time because
mm,
of the motives and the intents, without being propaganda per se,
yes,
but like what kind of goes in, I've already talked about Rand a lot, so let's go
mm,
outside that example,
mm,
like the what I'm it's in my reading list, but what I'm really wanting to read is James Clavell's Shogun series. I have the collection. Actually, it's my wife's collection, but
nice,
yeah, but that deals a lot with like the clash of individualist versus collectivist ideas with a
mm,
Westerner in Japan, right? So
yes,
yeah, there's a big you know, you can go into fiction and derive philosophy from it. That's, in fact,
absolutely, you can.
you should always do that, no matter what you're reading. If it's just shoving garbage philosophy at you, then it's a bad work of fiction. But if it's great, then you know.
And in fact, many authors are trying to convey a meaning there in their writing,
Mhm.
100%.
Right?
In
Yeah,
fact, another one of
yeah,
my favorite books is 1984 by George
yeah.
Orwell. I've read that several times. And yeah, obviously it's a warning about dictatorships and manipulation of society and so forth. So, but yeah, so I read that most recently a couple of years ago. I think
Hmm.
it was a couple of years.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, you know what? I have not been reading in the last couple of years, so I will pick up a novel and start reading, as I said, The Blood Star or something like that. So,
Sounds good.
yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, all right. What's next?
Well, yeah, okay. So I guess in summary, uh, I no longer talk about education as being one of the issues that is very concerning for men and boys because having
Hmm.
researched it over a period of about 15 years now, I'm actually far less concerned about it, ironically, than I was. That's not to say there aren't problems, but a lot of the, as I said, a lot of the problems in high school vanish when you start when you erase the biases, and in university, obviously, in a lot of cases, I think the men are making the better choices.
Hmm. Makes sense.
So yeah, so we want to talk about intellectual property a little bit, and I've also got a great man of
Hmm.
history. The
Yeah.
great man of history is Saladin, and I've
Okay.
introduced a new category: men of note. So, unlike great men of history, there may not be a man of note in every episode. It's just if I see somebody who I think needs to be talked about. Great men of history must be historical figures, and I think as we talked about offline, a lot of historians argue that history started 20 years ago. So that's where I'm drawing the line. So nobody's sort of nothing more recently than 20 years ago could be in great men of history. But
Yeah.
men of note can be modern or they can be historical.
Yes.
So. But I have a man of note as well as a great man of history. The man of note is, and I'm going to attempt to pronounce his name now, Mariano Bacicid. I think he's a Spanish gentleman,
Hmm.
and I may have just butchered his surname pronunciation, but he's a cancer researcher. Anyway, I'm going to mention him.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
but I think we did want to talk about intellectual property, which I think is something that came up a few episodes ago, and I said I wanted to just sort of, go and make a few notes before talking about it. I think that the reference was really in regards to free and open source software. So I'll
Right. Yeah.
just quickly go through intellectual property if you're happy for me to do that.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So intellectual property is broadly defined into three categories: copyright, patents, and trademarks. And it's an interesting uh, topic because the laws concerning copyrights, patents, and trademarks are all different. So there's an argument to say there isn't really one body called intellectual property. There are these three different categories, and they're actually quite different, but they're grouped in together, intellectual property. And I do it, but just
Yeah.
be aware that they are quite distinct. So copyright protects written works. Patents protect inventions, theoretically protect inventions,
Mhm.
and trademarks protect various company names and various images and so forth.
Yeah.
And I've been involved in free and open source software for a long time, and I just want to clarify before moving on with the other points is that free and open source absolutely rests on intellectual property laws. It's not at all public domain, as a lot of people think it is. There's a lot of misunderstanding there. It very much rests, particularly on copyright. But I'll
Mhm.
get to that in a minute. But I actually was involved. I used to be on the board of Software in the Public Interest, which is an organization that is a fiscal sponsor for free and open source projects. It's got quite some really big names in there. Postgres was in there for a long time, LibreOffice, all sorts of other projects, and we would hold the money, act as the legal body that would hold any copyrights and patents and so forth. And I helped renew the patent for a Debian symbol, for example, while I
Mhm.
was on the committee on the board of directors rather. So uh, anyway, yeah. So it's very being involved in free and open source. You actually have to be quite au fait with concepts like copyright and patent,
Mhm.
trademarks, and so forth. So anyway, um, so one of the interesting things about patents and trademarks. Now, I'll mention copyrights before I get onto that. Actually, copyright, arguably, in most countries, if you write something, it's automatically copyrighted, right? So a lot of people think you have to register a copyright. In general, you
Yeah.
don't.
Isn't that
Yeah.
called the Berne Convention?
Maybe. I don't
Yeah.
recall
Right.
the
Yeah.
name. Yes.
Yeah.
But having said that, if there's going to be any dispute, it makes sense to register. And there are organizations, government endorsed organizations, that can register your copyrighted material. And so if there's ever a question about it, then they can act as an independent party to verify that you had written it and so forth. Um, Patents and trademarks, on the other hand, have to be defended. And this is something that, for individuals, it's really not possible.
Mhm.
You said if there's any sort of anyone that starts using your trademarks or starts infringing on your patent anywhere in the world, you have to go after them. You need deep pockets to do that. Time and time again, individuals just can't do that. So unfortunately, it's often the case that if somebody has an invention, an individual, unless they're going to launch a company themselves and get investment money, the other thing they'll end up having to do is essentially sell it to a company. But a lot of companies will pay the individual quite handsomely for that, millions of dollars, and then they go on to make billions of dollars. Generally speaking, the individuals can't defend these things, unfortunately, and then there's a severe bias against individuals, and I'm really in the camp that says that at least in terms of patents, I'm not sure they really promote invention. When in recent years there've been a lot of recent decades been a lot of cases where they've been used to sort of suppress invention actually. So
Well,
there's software
then,
patents and so forth.
yeah, there's also the problem of patent trolling, right? Because
Yes,
yeah, right. So yeah,
you now go on. Do you want to talk about patent
yeah.
trolling?
I think, despite what I know, I think you know more. So
Um, yeah, maybe. I mean, so yeah, some people will essentially go after patents, and there are actually some jurisdictions where it's easier to lodge these sort of claims and go after someone's patents and sort of drain their resources. I
Hmm.
seem to remember something about Eastern Texas. I don't know if it's still the case, but for a long time, Eastern Texas was known as an area where the courts were more willing to entertain these sort of patent trolls. Um, if I could give you an example, was that a patent? Yes, it was a patent. So, and this is probably an example of a patent troll. The the Linux, the name Linux, which is the
Hmm.
operating system that much of the world runs on now. Originally, the name was not patented. It is now. So it was not trademarked, but it
Right.
is now.
Yeah.
So this would be a trademark trial, but uh, somebody by the name of William Delacroce Jr. Uh, trademarked the name Linux, and no attempts had been made. This is mid '90s, so Linux had only been around a few years, and people were just starting to make money out of it. And he trademarked the name, and then immediately sent letters of demand to all the companies that were releasing anything related to Linux, if anything based on Linux, and demanded royalties. Right. So there are about half a dozen big companies that were producing Linux distributions at the time. And they were, well, when I say big, they're all relatively small, but they were the ones that were maybe making some money out of it, about half a dozen of them. They ended up meeting in a crisis meeting to determine what to do about this. And they ended up pooling their resources, and because none of them were particularly big companies, pooling their resources and hiring a law firm to challenge it. And they won on the basis that William Delacroce Jr. had no basis for trademarking the term. He wasn't involved in it at all. So, and it was obviously a money grab. So anyway, the trademark was turned over to Linus Torvalds, who was the originator of the operating system,
Hmm.
and he ended up transferring it later to the Linux Foundation, which is an
Hmm.
organization which now holds it. But anyway, so a free license is then granted for anyone who wants to use it to essentially release anything under Linux. But it was protected. But yeah, William Delacroce Jr., I guess, is probably an example of one of these trolls where they were essentially going after this is in the case of the trademark, but there's also patents going
Yeah.
after it and essentially trying to make money out of it. So
Right. Without
uh,
developing it. Right. So,
without developing it, exactly. That's
yes.
right. Yeah, exactly. So uh, one thing I wanted to mention though that is kind of interesting, and I only realized this recently, and I think this is fairly new too. And I don't agree with this, but apparently AI text is generally considered to be copyright free, which I gather means anything generated by an AI, which I gather means it would be in the public domain. This seems to be the general consensus. I looked at a number of sources for this, including AI itself, to see what
Hmm.
the AI said, various AI said about it, and various other sources have said this. In many countries, they're taking the position that because no human was involved in the production of that specific text, that it's essentially the public domain. Now, don't go around, using it just because I say so. Research it yourself if you're planning to use AI text. But I do think this may actually, at the moment, the AI companies seem to be quite happy about this. But I think this is going to bite them actually, because essentially nothing that they're producing on the various AIs can be restrained by them, and
Hmm.
then people can just use it. I don't necessarily agree with this because uh, their derivative works by definition of humans,
Yeah.
and I would suggest all of the humans whose work was used ought to have either copyright or some sort of new category needs to be created
Hmm.
where they can gain something from the indirect use of their work.
Right.
And something I've done previously is take statements out of AI generated text, put it back into a search engine, and I found the document it came from. Right,
Hmm.
so it isn't always the case that the statements can't be tracked back. Sometimes,
Hmm.
if the number of documents is relatively small, it could easily be tracked back to an individual document. And they're really saying that that person can't claim a copyright on that statement
Hmm.
when we can clearly see it came from their work. So do be careful, but this is a position that's been taken. I do think it's going to backfire on the AI companies. But just going through my notes, see if there's anything else I wanted to.
I think we were
Yes,
talking
I did
about
want to
open
talk.
source.
Yes,
Go ahead.
exactly.
Go.
That's right. There,
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
was one last point I wanted to mention about open source software, and that is how it actually works in regards to copyright. And this is something that free and open source, and this is something that a lot of people don't understand. So if I write some code and I release it under a free and open source license, and I'm using that term because there's
Mhm.
people disagree on there's within the free and open source community there are differing views on whether on different licenses that are better and so forth. You have some people talk about free software, some people talk about open source software, and so
Yeah.
free and open source is more of a generic term.
Hmm.
So, but if I write some software or you write some software and you release it under a free license, like the GNU General Public License, for example,
Yep.
then you are the copyright holder, right?
Hmm.
And what you're granting to anyone who uses the software is a
Right.
license.
Yes.
So that the license has terms. It's not a free for all. That's another thing a lot of people don't understand about free and open source software. It's absolutely not a free for all. There are things you can't do with the software, and they're very
Yeah.
clearly stated.
Hmm.
Generally speaking, you can't, well, in the case of the general public license, or what we call the GPL, you can't attempt to stop redistribution. It's a bit more complicated than that, but as a short statement, you can't attempt to stop redistribution. So if I produce some GPL software and somebody takes that software and then produces something out of it, they should make the source available on the same basis that they produce the whatever they've made out of it, right? So if they should they should do it on the same basis I do it, in that they should not attempt to stop redistribution of the software. So but also too, they should broadly allow somebody to I said access the software on the same basis. If they modify it, also it has to be on the same basis as well. So if
Yeah.
they modified my code, they can't lock it up.
Right.
There is another license called the BSD license where you can do that. You can actually, and Mac OS X uses software that's based on the BSD license. They took that open source code, modified it, and they are allowed to not release the modified version.
Mm.
So this is where you get the differing opinions. But if you look at the GPL, which is what Linux uses, yeah, you can't attempt to stop redistribution of it broadly. It gets a little bit more complicated than that, but uh, as I said, it's if you did attempt to do something like that, like for example, if you took open source, took something out of the GPL, took Linux, modified it, released it, and didn't release the modified source code, you'd actually be breaching the license terms, and you would lose the right to use the software by virtue of having breached the license terms. That's the basis for enforcement.
Right.
And courts around the world have consistently held that this is enforceable. Interestingly enough, when I first got involved with free and open source software, it hadn't been tested yet.
Mm.
And so we didn't actually know whether the GPL worked or not. But Germany was an area where a lot of this was done because Germany allows people who are not interested parties to sue over license breaches, which is interesting. Most other jurisdictions, you have to be an interested party to do it, and so they had to find interested parties in, say, the United States or Australia or whatever, and just sue over breaches. But in Germany, free open source organisations were suing over
Hmm.
breaches for software that they weren't involved in, and the courts upheld the licenses consistently.
Right. Hmm.
So anyway, so yes, you just in summary, you produce software, you copyright it, you release it under a license, and people get license copies, and you can breach their license in a free and open source software by breaching license conditions by, for example, constraining it in the case of the GPL. So
Hmm.
I just wanted to make that clear that free and open source software very much relies heavily on copyright law and licensing and so forth. So,
Gotcha. Right. Yeah.
got great men of history.
Yes.
Yep. Right. So I've chosen Saladin, who was an Islamic leader from the. Actually, I didn't look up his lifespan. It was 11th, 12th century. I didn't look up exactly the year he lived and died, which I usually do. But he was one of the he opposed the Crusades, one of the Crusades, I think Third Crusade.
Okay.
I've said previously that the Crusades are often portrayed by Western historians as being very one-sided, but they very much weren't. You had the invasion of Iberia, Portugal and Spain. You had the invasion of Sicily and so forth. Nearly the invasion of Italy. Nearly the invasion of France. The Battle of Tours stopped an Islamic army conquering France.
Hmm.
Otherwise, the world history would be very, very different. So it was very much a battle of equals, and you had during this time Saladin being the sort of leader of the Islamic forces in the Middle East. You had Henry the Lionheart of England being a major figure fighting him.
Hmm.
But the really interesting things I think about Saladin are that interestingly enough, he was Kurdish, which of course is an
Hmm.
ethnic minority in the Middle East.
Right.
They're quite an interesting group, actually. There's various Kurdish groups in Iran and Syria and Turkey that are fighting Iraq. Actually, I think it's the other one, and they're fighting for a lot of them are fighting for some sort of independent state. But there is as yet no Kurdish state. But he was actually Kurdish, which makes him essentially an ethnic minority in the Middle East at the time. So he managed to unite squabbling warlords in Egypt and Syria and produce a sort of a unified defense against the European hold in the Crusader states
Hmm.
in the Middle East, and he retook Jerusalem
Yep.
from the Christians. And this was really interesting, actually, because he didn't massacre the inhabitants, which was
Hmm.
actually pretty unusual at the time. So, yeah, I mean, apparently the Christians had previously massacred the inhabitants when conquering Jerusalem. So he conquered Jerusalem and he gave the Christians a reasonable amount of time to leave. I don't know how long it was, actually, probably days, but probably not
Yeah.
very long. But he gave them a period of time, allowed them to leave peacefully. Um, and he also protected Jewish and Christian holy sites within the city, too. So he also had a reputation for keeping his word, and this actually made him quite a celebrity later on in Europe. Not during his
Hmm.
own lifetime, I believe, but later on in Europe, he actually had a lot of European actually respected Saladin. And interestingly enough, he and Richard the Lionheart actually exchanged gifts. They were opposite sides of this war, of course, and they never met, but they actually did exchange gifts on a number of occasions. And
Interesting.
when this is true, and this has really happened, and it gets better. When Richard the Lionheart fell ill, Saladin sent his doctor over to help him because
Okay.
Islamic medicine was better than European medicine at the time. And
Hmm.
so he sent his learned doctor over to help Richard. Again, this is all verified. Richard the Lionheart recover, and he did recover. So maybe the Islamic doctor helped him. I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, quite interesting that he's an interesting character. He really had a sort of a strong, I guess, moral and ethical sense, and he obviously, this is not to say that he was a pushover.
Right.
He could be quite violent and so forth, but his violence tended to be directed and tended to be deliberate, as in he would be
Hmm.
violent if he believed that achieved his strategic aims, not just massacre the inhabitants of the city because which was all too common at the time. So, in many ways, Saladin was ahead of his time. So that was the more of the aspect of Saladin. You read about Saladin, his life's well
Hmm.
documented, but that was more about the aspect that I wanted to talk about. The fact that he was a unifying figure and that he had this sort of sense of, I guess, personal honor, and he
Yeah.
did
That's
use
very
it
cool.
as a. That's the important bit exactly. And again, didn't stop him, being extremely violent when it felt it would achieve his aims. But it wasn't. His violence was not indiscriminate. It was deliberate. And that was
Exactly.
something that we would see later in later centuries, but in his time was relatively unusual. So anyway, Saladin. So he's a great
Yeah.
man of
Very,
history.
very interesting. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And I now I'm going to get on to man of note, Mariano uh, Barbacid. Oh gosh, I know I should have perhaps heard that name pronounced. I'm sure I probably butchered that rather badly.
Okay.
But he's a Spanish cancer researcher alive at the moment. He's been doing research in the last few years. So I think 10 or 20 years ago, he identified genetic markers for bladder cancer. And as if that isn't a significant achievement,
Hmm.
he's developed a new treatment. This is all in the last few years. He's developed a new treatment for pancreatic cancer. And I was quite impressed by this because as soon as I saw pancreatic cancer, I sort of really my my spidey sense went up because this is actually really, I think, a big thing, and it could save a lot of lives in the coming years. By the way, jump in. I know I'm doing a lot of talking, but jump in
No,
there
no,
if
no,
you
no,
want.
no, no. It's fine.
So it's particularly notable because pancreatic cancer is one of the more dangerous cancers. It's particularly dangerous because it's generally associated with late detection. People who have pancreatic cancer usually don't notice until they've got symptoms, and by then they're already in serious trouble.
Hmm.
Uh, it also has a tendency towards a rapid progression. And the third reason that it's a problem is because up until now, there've been very few treatments for it. So you've got a, late detected cancer that rapidly progresses, for which there are few effective treatments, right? So he's come along and developed an effective treatment. I don't know much about the treatment itself, actually, but I just want to mention this. I think this is really a big deal. Uh, that again, being one of the most dangerous cancers, the fact that he's come along and some have developed an effective treatment, I think is going to save a lot of lives.
Right.
Apparently, I was doing a little bit of reading earlier. Apparently, the 5 year at the moment before his treatment, that the 5 year survival rate for pancreatic cancer was something like only 7%, which is
Mm.
absolutely,
It's
yeah,
crazy.
it's really bad, really bad. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Even other cancers that are considered bad don't have rates that low.
Mm.
Apparently in Western countries it's a bit higher, it's about 13% or something. But even so, it's that's really, in both cases, that's extremely bad. So this is a very, very dangerous cancer. And the fact that he's come along and found an effective treatment, I think is really, really exciting.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
shout out to Mariano.
All right. For sure. Well, you need to send me the name, and maybe I can pronounce it better.
Exactly. If you could,
Yeah.
that would be fabulous. I do want to mention that that last episode I had a special mention for a gentleman, and
Hmm.
his name was Cecil Chubb, first Baronet of Stonehenge, which again I think is best name ever, being Baronet of Stonehenge.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I called him. I gave him a honourable mention, but I've classified him as the first man of note. So he's going to appear on the wiki page for the goalpost as the first man of note. So Cecil Chubb,
Right.
first Baronet of Stonehenge.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
and I have men of note lined up for the next two episodes.
Okay.
So yes, so you'll see that anyone who looks on the wiki for men page for
Hmm.
the goalpost will see their names.
Right.
So that's all I have, except for Zoe McClellan. I
Okay.
think you might have had a couple of items.
Well, yeah, let's see if I can get at least one of them in. So how familiar are you with the Amelia meme?
Somewhat. Yeah. So I guess if I could offer the summary that I know,
Yeah.
which is that the character of Amelia originally appeared in a publication made by the British government for high school students, and
Hmm.
she was the far right character. So they had different characters presenting different
Hmm.
opinions in the books,
Right.
and she's the far right character that everybody's meant to hate.
Hmm.
But she's been co-opted by people online, and they're producing all sorts of fun stuff in the
Right.
name of Amelia.
Right. Okay. So, now first off, a lot of my initial thoughts regarding this character are similar to that of Dr. Random Cam of Honey Badger Radio. He is not particularly fond of the memification, if I understand him correctly, because we're kind of portraying a lie. Basically, it's that this purple-haired girl is going to be like this bastion for the West, and it's more akin to a thirst trap, if I'm paraphrasing him correctly.
Mhm.
It's like a because we're trying to rally behind this girl that is by all accounts not real. We're not going to see a purple-haired girl
No.
that's kind of this trad fantasy or something like that. Trad fantasy being in itself a pipe dream. So so there's that, but there's also one uh, thing that I'm not hearing a lot is that it's very tangential, but every time we see some kind of pushback against the encroachment of mass migrants and anti-Western forces into the West, it's always spearheaded by a female symbol. I'm trying to remember her name. It's that girl who would brandished some small weapons to kind of keep away from
Oh
my.
yes,
Yeah, yeah. I don't
I
see.
know
I
who
don't
you
even
mean.
remember her name. That yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
But she could. I think it was it Scotland? I think.
Mhm.
Did this
That's right.
happen? Something like that. But it's like. this, where are the male figures? Do we not,
Mm.
I'm not saying that, uh, so here's the issue. There's been more than our fair share of men kind of, uh, trying to push back at this, but either they end up dead or are not talked about or are, dismissed, but girls get special spotlight. And
Yes,
it seems
100%.
like, it's symptomatic of a gynocentric society to
I was just going to say,
push.
even as you'd almost think our society was gynocentric.
Yes, right, exactly. And it's like, it's this whole thing about, placing these uh 15 minutes of Joan of Arc kind of a thing.
Mm.
It's like,
Actually, that's a really good point. They
yeah,
are kind of Joan of
right.
Arc characters, aren't they?
Yeah,
If I may
exactly.
jump in
Yeah.
there, I
Yeah, go
did
ahead.
find the stylistic choice interesting. Firstly, I did notice that it was a woman, and I did notice she had purple hair. And I actually was kind of surprised that they took those stylistic
Hmm.
choices, the British government, I
Right.
mean. I would have thought that they would have had a middle-aged white man do it actually,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. So I was a little surprised by that. So you made really good points there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, the thing about those kind of weird HR style cartoons, and we've all seen them, is that, hair color is kind of all over the place. I think it is. I don't necessarily know if that was their sheer intent when it comes to the hair color.
Mm.
Goodness knows that anime is all over the place when it comes to hair color, and it's not like there's any ideology attached to anything. But I think it's a similar deal. It's like more just what they think is their idea of vibrancy in an otherwise drab subject. But that's, and the other point that Rand McCam made was that this might be some sort of a psyop. So I think there's a very possibility there.
Hmm.
But the idea is that, it's like, do we let's try and what if we saw some more male heroes? What would the
Mm.
reaction be? I mean, we're not talking about the potential backlash because this Amelia stuff already getting backlash anyway. But it's like, um like every time I see one of those girls in the forefront or something like that, I have a sneaking suspicion that there's some shame associated. See, it's like there's no men doing this thing because nobody's making memes of men, but at the same time, they're shaming men for not having memes made of them.
Hmm.
In effect, because it's like a shame because see, a girl's doing this. Why aren't you, man? Why aren't you,
Mm.
stepping up? It's their favorite term, stepping up, and it's like like another double standard we're seeing here is that we're not demanding men, but at the same time we're shaming them for not showing up. So
Yeah.
this big thing is a symptom of that.
Yeah, and we actually saw that. I have seen that before. I spoke at the March for Men in Melbourne in 2018, and that was organised by Sydney Watson. Now, Sydney Watson has gone in a different direction now, but
Hmm.
at the time she
Right.
was spending a lot of time advocating for men's issues, and and some people did point that out and said, you know, some feminists, for example, oh, it takes a woman to speak for men's issues, and part of the answer to that was, well, yes, it's difficult for men to do that actually. But yes, it is interesting that it was raised at the time by
Hmm.
feminists.
Right. Exactly. Right. Like what? Yeah. When men do speak up, we're either shut down, ignored, or are demonized.
Mm.
And
Exactly.
yeah.
That's right.
But
I
the
think Pearl
gynocentrists
Davis
of
gets a
the
little bit of that too.
yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I was about to say that the gynocentrists of the right are certainly lapping up these Joan of Arcs.
Yes, yes, and that's probably a good term for them actually. They are Joan of Arc characters. Exactly. That's right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's all I really
So
have to say about that. So
okay, no worries. Now I think you did have another topic, but did you want to leave that to another
we
episode or?
why don't we leave that to another episode? I know it's late on your end, so
Oh, that's all right. I
um
think we've done well with time though, haven't we? It's
yeah,
been
we
quite a
have,
good
yeah, sure. I
length
think
episode.
we're
Yes.
yeah, right.
Yes.
Yeah. But we'll save it for
And
later.
yeah, but you're right, it's getting a little late, yeah.
Yeah.
I've got Zoe McClellan to
Yeah, go ahead.
mention.
Yeah.
Okay, great. As of February 2026, a warrant is outstanding for the arrest of Zoe McClellan in relation to charges of kidnapping, child stealing, and child custody deprivation. McClellan is a public figure who has appeared in numerous popular television shows, including Star Trek Voyager, JAG, NCIS New Orleans, and Designated Survivor. Her face is familiar to millions. It is extraordinary that she has evaded detection for so long. McClellan was reportedly residing in an apartment in River Ridge, Louisiana in April 2021 and may still be residing in the area. McClellan grew up in the area of Port Orchard, Washington State, and may have returned to the area. Some sources believe that McClellan has left the United States and is residing in Canada or Costa Rica. Prior to disappearing, McClellan was known to use the alias Sarah Chandler. Anyone with any relevant information should contact the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. And I want to add, too, that there's been virtually no uptake in all these years in the mainstream media. Okay. And Wikipedia will not allow any reference to the warrant being outstanding to be
Yeah.
mentioned. The editors of Wikipedia will prevent this. Just there are a few people out there who are talking about it, and I saw a blog post. I don't know if it's necessarily even a big blog. I did record on the Wiki for Men, but mentioned it, just talked about this and talked about the warrant and so forth, so there it is leaking out slowly, but a lot of people are still completely unaware that this public figure whose face is known to millions has a warrant for her arrest because her son is missing, and
Hmm.
so she needs to come before the court and present her arguments to the court. If she's got some legitimate arguments, by all means present them. But she's taken off and with her son, we don't even know. We don't know where he is. We don't know what's the state his education is in. Has he been attending school? It's awful.
Right.
Anyway,
Mhm.
but I just want to say that people are starting to mention a little bit more. So I'm hoping that we do see broader recognition of this, and that people start to become aware of the fact that
Yeah,
that she's missing and her son is missing.
absolutely.
That's all I have.
All right. Sounds good. We'll catch you next time.
See you then. Bye.
All right.